Capital leases. What is a capital lease? A capital lease is a contract entitling a renter to the temporary use of an asset, and such a lease has the economic characteristics of asset ownership for accounting purposes. The capital lease requires a renter to book assets and liabilities associated with the lease if the rental contract meets specific requirements. In essence, a capital lease is considered a purchase of an asset, while an operating lease is handled as a true lease under generally accepted accounting principles. A capital lease is an example of accrual accounting's inclusions of economics events, which requires a company to calculate the present value of an obligation on its financial statements. For instance, if a company estimated the present value of its obligation under the capital lease to be $100,000, it records a $100,000 debit entry to the corresponding fixed asset account and a $100,000 credit entry to the capital lease liability account on its balance sheet.
A finance lease, also known as a capital lease or sales lease, is a type of lease in which a finance company is typically the legal owner of the asset of the duration of the lease, while the lease not only has operating control over the asset but also some share of the economic risk returns from the change in valuation of underlying asset from the Wikipedia. And also, a capital lease also affects the income statement. You report depreciation as well as interest on the lease principal. You also record the right to use and the lease value respectively as an asset and a liability on the balance sheet.
Example of capital lease accounting. The agreement is to lease the airplane worth $1 million for period 6 years. There is no salvage value at the end of the lease period. The leases will choose to buy the asset at the end of the lease period at a value less than fair market value. Definition of capital lease. Capital lease is a lease agreement in which the lessor agrees to transfer the ownership rights to the lease after the completion of the lease period. Capital or finance lease are long-term and non-cancel in nature.
Description: in a capital lease, the lessor transfers the ownership rights of asset to the leases at the end of the lease term. The lease agreement gives the lease a bargain option by dint of which the lease can buy the asset at a discounted price than the fair market value at the end of the lease term. In a finance lease, the present value of the minimum lease payments approximates the fair value of the leased asset. Moreover, the lease term should equate to a majority of the useful economic life of the asset. If the lease is cancelled due to any reason, the loss emanating from the same needs to be borne by the lease. At the end of the lease term, the lease is considered to be the owner of the asset and has the right to claim depreciation and finance charges.
Morning, my name is Charles Roderos and this is my report. First is, what is pension obligation? Pension obligation are taxable bonds that some state and local government have issued as part of an overall strategy to fund the unfunded portion of their pension liabilities by creating debt. The use of pension obligation bonds or POB is in rest on the assumption that the bonds proceeds when invested with pensions assets in higher yielding assets classes. will be able to achieve a rate of return that is greater than the interest rate owed over the term of the bonds.
Definition: pension obligation. The term pension obligation can refer to one of three different ways to measure the future expenses or liabilities associated with a pension plan. Generally, pension obligation can be stated in terms or accumulated, vested, and projected benefits. Explanation: companies will provide employees with a pension plan as a part of larger array of employment benefits. Pension plans are structured by companies to provide a periodic and reliable source of income when the employee reaches the plan's normal retirement age.
Next one. What are the types of pensions? These are the types of pensions: personal pensions, stakeholder pensions, self-invested pensions or SIPPS, pension for the self-employed, multi-employer pension schemes. Personal pension. A personal pension is a type of defined contribution pension. You choose the provider to make arrangement for your contributions to be paid. If you haven't got a workplace pension, getting a personal pension could be a good way of saving retire. Next is stakeholder pensions. Stakeholder pensions are form of defined contributional pensions. They have low and flexible minimum contribution. They charge and a default investment strategy if you don't want to choice. Some employers offer them, but you can start one yourself. Next one is self-invested personal pensions or SIPPS. A self-invested personal pensions is a pension wrap that holds investment until you retire and start to draw a retirement income. It is a type of personal pension and works as a similar way to a standard personal pension. The main difference is that with a SIPP, you have more flexibility with the investments you can choose. Personal pensions for the self-employed. If you're self-employed, saving into a pension can be more difficult habit to develop than it is for people in employment. There is no one to choose a pension schemes for you. No employer contribution and irregular income pattern which all make saving difficult. But preparing for retirement is crucial for you to sorry don't to find out where you start. The last one is multi-employer pension schemes. All employer must now automatically enroll eligible worker into a workplace pension schemes. And contribute to it. In many cases, employer will use multi-employer pension scheme, sometimes called a master trust. So that's it, guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Herman Atkinson. I will discuss the contingency. A contingency is a potential negative event that may occur in the future, such as an economic recession, natural disaster, or fraudulent activity. Companies and investors plan for various contingencies through analysis and implementing protective measures. Contingency plans can include the purchase of options or insurance for investment portfolios. Although contingencies can be prepared for, the nature and scope of such negative events are typically unknowable in advance. Companies and investors plan for various contingencies through analysis and implementing protective measures. So now we have types of contingency plans. Contingency plans are utilized by corporations, government, investors, and by the central banks. Contingencies can involve real estate transactions, commodities, investments, currency exchange rate, and geopolitical risk. First, we have protecting asset. Next, investment positions, business continuity and recovery, cybersecurity. Protecting assets. Contingency might also include contingent assets, which are benefits rather than losses, than accrue to a company or individual given the resolutions of some uncertain event in the future. Investment positions. Investors protect themselves from contingency that could lead to financial losses related to investing. Investor might employ various hedging strategies such as stop loss orders, which exits a positions at a specific price level. Business continuity and recovery. As part of contingency plans for disasters such as a pandemic, companies need to plan ahead to ensure that the business can operate during and after an event. Cybersecurity. With any type of disaster, cybercriminals often try to take advantage of a crisis to hack into a company's systems and steal data or disrupt business operations. Financial contingency planning has two critical goals. One is to address the immediate response to the crisis. The other focuses on normalizing operations after the event has occurred or in areas of a business untouched by the crisis. So the financial levers you should be prepared to pull might include funding and costs. Funding means cash reserves are king in crisis situations, although experts suggest businesses hold enough cash or other highly liquid assets to cover 6 months of operating expenses. Studies show that many smaller businesses don't do that. Access to line of credit, short-term loans, and business continuity insurance are a few other funding sources companies should secure in advance of any crisis. Because its expenses, staff, and even entire business units can be cut or sold in an effort to protect profitable activities and maintain positive cash flow. So we have 7 steps to create a financial contingency plan. We have identify risks, analyze causes, track indicators, prescribe actions, analyze your financial profile, inventory your asset and funding sources, make plans to reallocate, cut, or leverage. Identify risks, narrow down your company's risks to 5 or 6 realistic scenarios that could truly derail your business. Analyze causes, understand and document why each of these situations might emerge. Track indicator based on this analysis, list the possible signs of trouble and come up with ways to track them to stay ahead of the situation. Prescribe actions details the strategy for responding to each crisis by specifying and prioritizing which steps to take, how, by whom, and in what time frame. Analyze your financial profile. Use all the financial planning and analysis tools you have to detail your operations and the markets you serve, including cost, cash flow, and competitive positioning. Inventory your assets and funding sources. Ask yourself these questions. How much do you have in cash reserves? Which assets are indispensable? and need to be protected. Which assets would you consider shuttering or selling? Where could you cut spending without risking profitability? How much can you borrow quickly? Do you have business interruptions insurance? Make plans to reallocate, cut, or leverage. Usually, the first and best options are scaling down productions using lines of credit with your bank or selling of non-core business unit. Each option should be rated for its speed, reliability to raise funds. For instance, selling a business unit might have a shower, less certain outcome than taking out of short-term loan when time is of the essence. The following best practices can also help optimize the development and maintenance of your financial contingency plan. First, we have the activations. You should have a policy in place that describes exactly when a contingency plans would be activated, including the decision-making process and who is involved. Next, reviews. Examine these plans on a quarterly basis considering economic shift and workforce changes to account for economic factors or other issues relating to the business such as new contact details or a significant change in cash reserves. Next, we have communications. Make sure the plan is communicated to select individuals in your company across departments so they can review and understand it before any crisis materializes. And learn from experience. As with any good business plan, companies should learn from experience whenever they turn to the contingency plan and make adjustment that will put in a better positions for the next crisis. So we have financial contingency plan templates. Financial contingency plan templates, a variety of tools are available to help you develop a financial contingency plan. You can start brainstorming your response to crisis by downloading these top-level financial contingency planning templates. So first, we have a trend lines. Trend lines is monitoring critical metrics over time such as cash flow and accounts receivable may provide early warning signs of major setback for your business. Second, mind maps. Organize and categorize the wide range of risks your company faces to help you winnow them down and prioritize the biggest threats. Risk impact chart. These charts organize risks based on their impact and probability of occurrence to help you prioritize responses. Next is decisions diagrams. Visually map specific responses to specific events, giving leaders a clear plans of actions during a crisis. So, that is my topic. Thank you po.
Off-balance sheet financing or the OBSF. So, what is off-balance sheet financing or the OBSF? So, off-balance sheet financing, an accounting technique in which a debt for which a company is obligated does not appear on the company's balance sheet as a liability. So, yung off-balance sheet financing ay tumutukoy sa non-recording ng ilang mga obligasyong financing. Kabilang sa mga halimbawa ng off-balance sheet financings ay ang mga operating leases when they are in a substance capital leases, joint ventures, and the limited partnership, and many recourse obligations on sold receivables. So, Keeping debt off the balance sheet allows a company to appear more creditworthy but misrepresents the firm's financial structure to creditors, shareholders, and the public. A common form of off-balance sheet financing is an operating lease in which a common rents rather than buys a capital assets. In operating lease, the company must record only the rental payments and not the whole cost of the asset. While off-balance sheet financing is permissible, it can become unsustainable and can hide a company's true financial rate. So to understand off-balance sheet financing, companies sometimes take a creative approach when making big purchases. Those with mountains of debt will often do whatever it takes to ensure that their leverage ratios do not lead their agreements with lenders, otherwise known as the covenants, to be breached. They will be also mindful that a healthier looking balance sheet is likely to attract more investors, and the banks tend to charge highly leveraged firms more to borrow money as they consider more likely to default. So these are the key takeaways. So the first one is off-balance sheet or the OBSF financing is an accounting practice whereby companies record certain assets or liabilities in a way that prevents them from appearing on the balance sheet. So it is used to keep debt to equity or the DE and leverage ratios low, facilitating cheaper borrowing and preventing covenant from being breached. And next is regulators have been seeing to clamp down and questionable off-balance sheet financing or the OBSF. More stringent reporting rules has not been introduced to give more transparency to controversial operating leases. So these are the example in a real world of off-balance sheet financing on the OBSF. This Greek energy giant Aaron used a form of off-balance sheet financing known as the Special Purpose Vehicles or the SPVs to hide its mounting to debt and toxic asset. So what is a toxic asset? So a toxic asset is a financial asset that has fallen in the significantly and for which there is no longer a functionable market. Such assets cannot be sold at a price satisfactory to the holder because assets are offset against liabilities and frequently leveraged. This decline in the price may be quite dangerous to the holder. The company traded its quickly rising stock for a cash or the notes from the SPV or to the special purpose vehicle. So the SPV used the stock for hedging on the Aaron's balance sheet. So what is a hedging? So a hedging is an investment that protects your finances from a risky situations. Hedging is done to minimize or to offset the change that your assets will lose value. It also limits your loss to a known amount if their assets thus lost value. It's a similar to home insurance. So when Aaron's stock began falling, the values of the SPV went down. The Aaron was financially liable for supporting them because Aaron could not repay its creditors and investors to the company filed for bankruptcy. So although the SPV were disclosed in the notes on the company's financial documents, few investors understood the seriousness of the situation.
Off-balance sheet finance. Off-balance sheet finance, accounting practice whereby a company does not include a liability on its balance sheet. Significant capital expenses are kept off of a company's balance sheet using different classification strategies in this type of financing, used to impact a company's level of debt and liability. Goal of OBSF: to to keep a company's debt at or below a predetermined amount, resulting in a low debt to equity ratio. When a company's ratio is positive, it tends to be a strong credit risk. Example of OBSF. 1. Operating leases. A company record only leasing expense for the equipment rather than the full cost of purchasing it outright. When a corporation buys it outright, it reports the asset, equipment, and the responsibility purchase price. As a result, by using an operating lease, a business is just tracking leasing costs rather than the entire purchase price, resulting in a cleaner balance sheet. 2. Partnership firm. Another common of balance sheet finance. Even if a company has a controlling interest in a partnership, it is not required to show the partnership's liability on its balance sheet, resulting in a cleaner balance sheet. 3. Evaluate by the analyst. The analyst must be aware that some management will try to conceal debt and that new methods are constantly being tested. A careful examination of footnotes and management comments, as well as management inquiries, can reveal the existence of unrecorded liabilities. Why is OBSF so attractive? For companies that already have high debt levels, borrowing more money is typically more expensive than for companies that have little debt because the interest charged by the lender is higher. 2. Borrowing might increase a company's leverage ratio, causing agreements called covenants between the borrower and lender to be violated. 3. The accounting benefits of partnerships are many. For liquidity for a company.